The meeting will now continue into a session on state government relations moderated by Dr. Lauralee Ma. I'd like to invite Dr. Ma and the panelists to come to the stage while I do some additional introduction of this session. This session was developed with the input from you, our attendees, and aims to share practical information with you from state chapters who have had varied experience in local advocacy and government relations. So I'll turn the podium over to Dr. Ma.
Thank you, Tim. I wanted to welcome everybody to the State Government Relations panel discussion. My name is Lauralee Ma, and I'm a private practice radiologist in Baltimore, Maryland. Currently, I serve as a counselor of the Maryland Radiological Society, and I'm incoming chair of the ACR State Government Relations Committee. My fellow panelists today and I have been closely involved with our state advocacy, and this panel represents chapters of varying sizes. We will discuss our experience and hopefully help you to identify strategies to strengthen your state government relations programs. I wanted to introduce our panel first. Our panelists today include Tyler Prout, Clinical Associate Professor of Radiology and Chief of Ultrasound Imaging at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine. Also with us is Terrence Healy, Director of Thoracic Radiology in the Warren Alpert Medical School of Brown University in Rhode Island. Next, Jim Schlund is Chairman-elect of the 11th District of California Medical Association and also founder, construction manager, and former director of the Chico Breast Care Center. And David Humans. Dave is currently serving as the president of the Radiological Society of New Jersey. He is also current chairman of the Radiology Advocacy Network, or RAN for ACR, and immediate past chairman of the Department of Radiology for Penn Medicine Princeton Healthcare System. Thank you for joining me today. I will go first. I will be giving an update on the Maryland Radiological Society's work, and then the other speakers will give their respective advocacy experiences in their states. We will have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end, so please hold your questions to all of the speakers have presented. We have a lot to share today, so let's dive in. Well, let's see. Got it. Okay, sorry, I had to get my clicker here. I'm speaking on advocating on recurring issues. Maryland's defense of our anti-self-referral law is our really 20-year fight. Maryland has had an anti-self-referral law since 1993. A number of other physicians groups obviously do not agree with this law, and we've had numerous legislative challenges which continue today. Having to deal with a recurring issue of this type is tiring, both for radiologists in our state, having to defend the law year after year, as well as legislators who have to hear those same arguments and really do tire of it. Thus far, we've been able to uphold our law, and I have learned a number of lessons because of this long-standing battle. One is to really be knowledgeable about the topic you're defending. Keeping up to date with national data and publications has helped our defense as we are able to show data to support our law. Actually, the ACR's helped for self-referral. V.J. Rao and David Levin papers have helped a lot for us. There was a New England Journal article from Gene Mitchell. These are all important data that we can show our legislators when we're in this fight. It's also important, though, to have personal stories. Legislators are more likely to listen to a story that may resonate with their own personal experience. Back in the early 2000s, when orthopedic surgeons had MRI scanners in their offices, they would often say that, well, I can see my patient in the office, they'll immediately go to the MRI scanner, and then the report will come up quickly, and we can do it a lot faster than radiologists. Well, we could show them that wasn't true. We talked about prior authorization and insurance company issues. We can do studies same day, but the truth of the matter is most of the time you have to schedule the study, get it authorized by insurance, and then have the study done and read. When we were able to talk about those issues, some of the legislators had those same issues as well. So that was important to be able to have stories that could resonate with the legislators. We also really try to meet with legislators at least yearly, even before legislation is introduced. You don't want to see them when you have an ask. You want to see them before the battles begin. You want to have a friendly tone, which can be helpful when you are in the midst of a contentious battle. Another thing we did learn, and we've done in the last 5 or so years, is to have a lobby day. We bring the residents from Hopkins and Maryland every year to talk to the legislators about our issues. The legislators like to see new faces, especially their constituents, And in the first couple of years, we were really leading the discussion and the residents were following us. But in the last couple of years, the residents actually started to talk themselves and actually give the reasons, for these, for our positions. And actually, I have to say that the legislators really, really liked that. So I think that having that lobby day shows that it's not just the same old faces, that it's a lot of new faces. We have the first and second year residents come from Hopkins and Maryland. And they also like to see the legislative process. We actually show them the House sessions, the state office buildings. And I think it was actually good for them to get them indoctrinated a little bit into the legislative way of doing things. Relationships. Well, relationships with the head of your healthcare committees in your state is important. If they trust you as a source of information, they're more likely to trust you in divisive circumstances. I like it when a legislator, a senator, a delegate says that I'm their radiologist, because that means that they're going to trust me when there are difficult questions where they may be hearing the other side. At the same time, though, sometimes your delegate or senator isn't on the healthcare committee. It's still important, though, to have a relationship with them because they value input from their constituents. If there happens to be a bill that goes against radiology and it happens to get out of the House or Senate, because they usually have to be voted in their committees first, and it gets to the main floor, having that relationship with your own constituent can be very helpful in making sure that it doesn't go through both houses and get voted into law. A lobbying team. A lobbying team is really important. So I don't know if every state society has a lobbyist, but it really is important because they're in the state capitol all year long. They're keeping an ear for what's happening in the legislature. And they have relationships with the legislators that can be invaluable when bills are coming up for hearings and votes, because they're not just representing you. I mean, the ones who represent us also represent, like in our state, the corporate dentists. And the corporate dentists have a lot more money than we do. And so we get to go to all of those events as well. And it's actually very helpful because they're seeing those lobbyists all the time. Now, your state medical society, for years, it was just the MRS, and we were doing our work. And I realized at some point that our own state medical society, about maybe 10 years ago, was actually working against us. And that's when I realized that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It's really important to realize that you have to have allies. And if you're involved in your state society, it gives you that balanced view of issues in medicine and a lot of insight just from seeing all of the other specialties as well. And I'm now actually on my state's AMA delegation, and I've learned a lot about medicine. I go to the AMA meeting every year, and it's been an invaluable source of having a more balanced view of all the issues and how they tie together. The other thing is that the lobbyists of your state society may actually have a better overall view of medical issues as well and offer another avenue to interact with your legislators. In other words, we used our lobbyists for self-referral, but when we had tomosynthesis questions, when we had breast density, when we have telehealth regs, a lot of times the lobbyists from our state society were as helpful or more helpful in helping us to win these battles, which we've done really well on. And in conclusion, because I'm talking about recurring issues, don't give up. Sometimes it's really easy to become cynical or feel like you have no chance of winning. And we've been doing this for 20 years, and there have been so many years we felt like we're losing this year, we're not going to make it. But every year is a victory. The longer you hold the line, the more likely some other event will occur to change the playing field. And finally, remain as friendly as possible with your opponents. They're often your referrers, your colleagues, or your employees. By doing so and having other issues where you agree, the enmity of the fight can be lessened. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. And now our next panelist is from California. James Schlund is closely involved with the advocacy work of the California Radiological Society. The CRS has been very successful in bifurcating their advocacy efforts between legislative and regulatory fronts on securing coverage for breast tomosynthesis, and Jim is here to share that experience with us. Jim.
Lorelei, thank you so much. Thank you very much to the American College and all of the advocacy efforts that have led to success for us in California. I have not many slides. Let me see what I've got. So that's my street credentials. I have no conflicts of interest except that I am a true believer. This is the Chico Breast Care Center. We'll come back here in a minute. And this is a story that I can share with you. What this slide reminds me is that for every man that accomplishes something, there are the women behind him who made it true. It will embarrass my wife deeply. She teaches second grade, but she's in the audience. Kristen, thank you. That's the reason I'm here. Let me back up. Let me take you to the Chico Breast Care Center. This is a full DBT center that we designed in 2014. It took us a year in design. We were 6 months in the build. It came live as a complete comprehensive integrated breast care center in July of 2015. The first floor is screening, diagnostic work, biopsy, completion, pre-surgical staging. The second floor is dedicated breast surgery, dedicated breast medical oncology, dedicated high-risk and complementary and alternative medicine. It's 14,000 square feet. We built it at $200 a square foot. So we've got 2.8 on the building. The equipment and all of the kit pushes the entire capital. We had to capitalize $4 million to make it work. The pro forma looked great. The building looked great. The plan looked good. We issued the notice to proceed. We actually built the product. It came live in time, and we thought the timing looked good. CMS actually decided to cover the code on digital breast tomosynthesis January of 2015. There was one flaw, that the commercial carriers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, didn't get the memo on that one, and that left us in a situation where we had a comprehensive integrated breast care center designed around DBT, and we saw early on that it had a higher cancer detection rate and a lower callback rate. We couldn't actually bring ourselves to do anything but DBT. So the payers were recognizing it as investigational and experimental, and we were continuing to slog on and do DBT because it's just that good. Economics, people in economics would call this a revenue discontinuity, that I had a great pro forma on one hand, and I had partners with no bonuses on the other hand. This is called POP, or what you call pissed off partners. And if necessity is the mother of invention, I was about to be the most creative person you ever met. I had to find my way out of this problem. And so, in the depth of this thing, I realized, okay, I had to understand my adversary. I had to understand the commercial nature of healthcare insurance. I had to get a team together, and I reached quickly out to all of the people I knew. So we reached out to the American College of Radiology. Mark Olson is out here. Eugenia Brandt is out here, and the American College, and thank you. They came quickly to the help of this. We reached out to academia, the literature, best evidence practice medicine. We reached out to actually industry itself. We had to understand how industry thought about things, how capitalism worked. We got that team together. And then importantly, we found levers. There are 3 levers in scale long enough to lift a billion-dollar industry off of its premium dollar. Those levers are legislators, adjudicators, and regulators. So the legislative lever was launched with Bob Ackerman and the California Radiologic Society. And Bob, I know you're out here, and thank you. For which AB 2764 got us to Assemblywoman Bonilla to recognize and reimburse DBT. A legislative fix is $1 million fix, but we were up against a $1 billion industry. And we have the best government that money can buy. It was going to be a long fight. We went then to adjudicators. You can actually sue for what you want, especially in California. But that, remember, you're small fry suing a $1 billion industry. So we actually launched a PR campaign because it's actually better when people sue on your behalf. And that the women in California quickly came to understand that their first covered benefit of service, screening, was actually being denied to them. and they actually sued in class action against Blue Cross and Blue Shield. The third lever is the regulatory lever, and this is the one that I like the most. In California, the regulatory oversight function of government that oversees plans, everybody has a boss, by the way, and the plans have a boss, and their boss in California is not the Department of Insurance, it's the Department of Managed Healthcare, it's the DMHC. So we appealed to the DMHC, and part of their engagement is actually to come out and understand new technology. So we called up the deputy director to the Department of Managed Healthcare and said, how would you like to come to our center and understand digital breast tomosynthesis? And she said, yes. That was the first glimmer of hope. They left Sacramento and came to the Chico Breast Care Center. It was remarkable. That was in February of 2016. They saw the center. We actually looked at the technology. They read cases with us, and they were impressed. That was the second glimmer of hope. And then we asked them almost a demure question. We said, we have a 100% denial rate on this code. The carriers are not covering digital breast tomosynthesis. At the time of service, would we be allowed to have the patient sign in advance for their independent medical review, knowing that we have a 100% denial on that code? And they said, yeah, that sounds reasonable to us. It was on. That was the third glimmer of hope. Because in California, the patient doesn't have to go through the in-plan grievance process if they've been denied access to care, especially if it's considered investigational and experimental. You can actually file an independent medical review request. You can take your complaint to the state. There is an old saying in business, and that is, never wantonly and systematically give a regulator the middle finger. And so what happens now is that we scaled this up to an industrial scale project, that we actually, our center alone generated 3,500 requests for independent medical review in 1 year, and the other centers in California, thanks to blast fax and everything else through the CRS and our colleagues on the team, that we scaled it up to 10,000 requests for independent medical review. We hold the state record for the greatest number of independent medical reviews filed on any one topic. Each one of those independent medical reviews was sent out by the state for independent review. 3 physicians, and we had a 94% response rate in favor of DBT, overturning the denial. The carriers had to pay for the cost of the review and the cost of the service. It's about $450 per review, but it's still a rounding error against the carriers. They're big fish. But they were up against a compliance problem that was a progressively increasing problem in compliance. And the one thing that regulators don't like is when you disregard what they're doing, because essentially regulators are the tenured civil servants in oversight of the function of being civil. And in this case, Blue Cross and Blue Shield were not being civil, and the regulators could see it. And so it was just a matter of time. The regulators thoughtfully and kindly asked Blue Cross and Blue Shield to come and understand DBT, and they did. Blue Shield came in July of 2016, saw the center, we looked at the technology, we read cases together, and they overturned or changed their medical policy. Anthem did the same thing reluctantly in August. We actually had to meet Anthem in the Department of Managed Healthcare. What I learned was each and every person makes a difference. I was never born to this role. I got forced into it. You're only as strong as your team, and I will be in deep gratitude to all the people who were actually there every day, and also that team and the advocacy of the American College of Radiology, for which I will be always thankful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. The Rhode Island Radiological Society is represented by Terrence Healy, a counselor for the RIRS, and he is here today to share the advocacy experience from the perspective of a relatively small society and all the challenges that go along with it. Welcome, Terrence.
Great, thanks so much for having me. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking my society members, many of whom are here today. This is a story that started about 10 years ago. We like to call ourselves the biggest little state in the union, Rhode Island, and we're dealt with the same challenges that many of you have in small states, medium-sized states, as well as the largest of the states. This is our success story. I'm not going to give you a lot of data or a lot of slides, but just to know that in 2008, our state budget was in a huge deficit. In fact, at an 11th hour, there was a bill introduced to the budget that added a 2% net patient services revenue tax on freestanding ambulatory surgery centers and imaging services performed by non-hospitals, provided that the number of radiology procedures in a month exceeds 200. And get this, it does not apply to nonprofit organizations, ambulatory care facilities, doesn't apply to dentists, doesn't apply to podiatrists or veterinarians. And this 11th hour proposal accounted for about $4 million in revenue for the state each year. I'm gonna go back to that last sentence, because this is very important where I'm gonna go towards the end of this talk, is that we had other medical colleagues that were able to absolve themselves of this tax. Now that's very interesting. Okay, an 11th hour bill, we didn't receive this. Nobody in our radiology society knew about this. And in fact, nobody in our medical society knew about this. How did this happen? Rhode Island Medical Society, our state AMA society, has a lobbyist. They have a public laws committee on which I sat, and we'd go over all the bills that were introduced or thought to be introduced in the coming year, and we discussed their possible implications on our medical practice. As a Rhode Island Radiology Society at this time, we didn't have our own lobbyist. We didn't review many of the bills that may be introduced in the legislative season. Now that it's happened, what does it mean for us? In the past few years, there's already been 15 Medicare cuts to radiology. I had only been in practice for a year. This is doom and gloom. Maybe I should, think about a different career or invest wisely. So, we have to ask ourselves, if we're going to complain about it, what are the arguments against this tax? Well, there are lots of unintended consequences. The first of which, that's important to everybody in this room, is $4 million coming off the top after 15 Medicare cuts in the last 5 years to radiology. It's obviously going to have an effect on our salary. Rhode Island's already a difficult area for us to recruit to. It's a small state. The salaries are already on the lower end of the mean, and we have pretty high property taxes. Well, what about the quality of care? When we start to talk about quality of care and how these taxes might influence our patients, now we have a shot. Okay, so what could happen if you cut $4 million out of radiologists' budget, their annual capital budget? Well, maybe that 3T that we wanted to get, or maybe these TOMO units that we wanted to buy. These are the first things that we thought practices would cut. No new capital expenditures. Okay? So now we're stuck with a population in Rhode Island who's being imaged on outdated equipment. And at the time, you can remember, 2008 through 2010, lots of concern publicly about radiation exposure on CT scans. So are we going to invest for new technology to lower the radiation dose? Probably not. How about our services? Not only do we have worse equipment or don't invest in new capital equipment, we're going to have to probably cut some of our ancillary services. Maybe we can get by with one less CT tech, one less MRI tech. The quality, again, could this come into question? We predicted in our own practice, which is called Rhode Island Medical Imaging, we represent about 60 to 70% of all the imaging that's done in Rhode Island, that we would cut our personal employee staff by about 10% with the implementation of this tax. We needed to tell our story. The only people that we could call, phone a friend, are our colleagues in New Jersey, Minnesota, and Florida. They had similar legislation, but not to such a great expense as an overall 2% tax. Who cares about the radiologists? Who am I going to complain to? Who would listen? Does anybody care about this? Maybe I would hear, stop whining. You radiologists are a bunch of rich doctors. Who cares about $4 million out of your capital expenditures? Well, we had to do something. And at this time, I was pretty involved in the Rhode Island Radiology Society, as were about 5 or 6 others in the group who were very active on this front. We actually started a Rhode Island Radiology Society Political Action Committee from scratch. We had never had one before this point. We hired our own lobbyist from the Rhode Island Radiology Society, a specific lobbyist for us who would always be at the state watching our back. This is not free. We have about 75 paying members in our state, and at $2,000 a month, this takes a chunk of our Rhode Island Radiology Society budget. We started to attend state office and local political fundraisers, and between 2009 and currently, we attend over 50 fundraisers a year so that we have a face and a voice at fundraisers. By 2013, myself and a couple of my colleagues, we were widely recognized at political fundraisers with other lobbying efforts. So the radiologist now becomes a political activist. And this is probably the most important thing that I can tell you. Just by chance, after one of our Rhode Island Radiology Society meetings, I had stopped and gotten takeout for my wife and children, and the person next to me waiting for her takeout happened to be a political advocate of the current standing treasurer of the state of Rhode Island. And we got talking. Her husband happened to be a urologist, so we were talking the doctor thing, and she says, "Oh, Dr. Healy, you know something? The current governor is planning on announcing that the current treasurer, is going to run for governor. And she would love to have medical advocates. Would you be willing to join me and the current treasurer of the state, Gina Raimondo, for lunch? And I'll pay." I'm like, wow, I'm going to go to a fundraiser, kind of, have some political influence, and not have to bring a check. This is great. Plus, I get free lunch. So we met with the treasurer and actually decided to throw her a fundraiser. The first fundraiser that we hosted was in 2013. And remember, this tax bill, started in 2008. So now we have paid 5 years of a projected $4 million, so maybe $20 million coming out of, again, the radiologist's pockets. We actually had Gina Raimondo, who eventually became governor, tour our facilities. All right, she was able to recognize, wow, these are not hospital employees. These radiologists actually employ people, and at the time, we employed about 250 people outside of our hospital practice. She got to realize, wow, this is a small to moderate-sized business. These jobs are high-paying. And her whole run for office was based on job creation and economy. So she was able to hear our story, see that we contributed to her political vision. We told her the story. I told her the same numbers I just gave you. In reality, 5 years later, our outpatient jobs had decreased by 8%. In 70 years of business, Rhode Island Medical Imaging, for the first year, had not hired a radiologist in 2013. This is doom and gloom for jobs. And in fact, if you look at the collection from the state was actually only collecting about $1 million a year. So even though they had hoped to collect $4 million a year, or $20 million by this point, they had only collected about $5 million in taxes. 2016, this is the governor's first budget. She proposed a 3-year phase-out of this 2% tax, again, in favor of job creation and hearing our complaints about quality. However, due to these relationships that we had built with our Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello, and the then Senator President Paiva Weed, again, attending fundraisers, having them know us, they actually eliminated the entire tax effective July 1st, 2015, something that we could have never dreamed of. 2 years now, we're into the two plus years of this tax being eliminated. In my practice alone, we have created jobs. We held up on our promises. We added 7.6 FTEs in radiologists. We've added 6.7 FTEs in clinical staff and 12.7 administrative staff. The take-home message here is you must be politically active locally, and you cannot assume that the State Medical Society will protect us, the radiologists. Again, a very common phrase, if you're not at the table, you will be served. Rhode Island radiologists were served up in 2008 at the tune of $1 million a year. PAC contributions were essential to fund this effort. We could not have hired our own lobbyist with only the funds received from the ACR. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terrence. Our next panelist is from Wisconsin. We've heard from a small chapter. Now let's switch gears and hear the perspective of a large state. Tyler Prout is the incoming chapter president for the Wisconsin Radiological Society, and he will tell us about the lessons they have learned in state advocacy. Tyler.
All right, well, let's roll up our sleeves and do this. I'm Tyler Prout, the incoming president of the Wisconsin Radiologic Society, and first want to thank Eugenia and the other session organizers for inviting me to speak today. Actually, I was kind of surprised when she reached out to our chapter because I would not categorize ourselves as a powerhouse society with deep political ties or even a state PAC yet. But what I hope to share with you is really a story or journey of a small to medium-sized chapter. I know they're saying we're large, but I would argue we're more on the small side to medium side. We're kind of earning our chops in this government relations world. So we Wisconsinites, we excel in the consumption of beer and cheese, and we do a lot of VC up there. But aside from that, we're your typical Midwest state. We have 7 counselors a year and a pretty small group of active members. And until recently, we would joke at our board meetings every year that it was the same group of us sitting around the table every year that accounted for all the RadPAC donations, which was an abysmal 5 to 7%. For a decade, our chapter has had a lobbyist, and my opinion has vacillated on that over time because it's one of our largest budget items, and we're not really flush with cash. And so, although over that same period of time, I've kind of learned the value of a lobbyist, to have an ear on the ground, to be aware of issues early on, to track those issues, arrange meetings with state rep offices, et cetera, values which really cannot be overstated. He and Greg Bogus, our legislative chair, who among us radiologists really have the deepest understanding of these government relations issues, anchor our team. Past leadership sessions have stressed the importance of strategies that show the value and relevance of your society to your members and prospective members in order to retain and grow membership. There are a lot of competing interests for people's time these days, and we've also heard the cliche, and really it's a truth, that all politics are local. So I'd argue that a strong government relations team is one of the most important things a state chapter can do to demonstrate value and service to its members. And frankly, this is not going to be replaced by any of these other societies competing for their time. And in time, I believe this will pay dividends with regards to engagement and membership. My involvement with the WRS began back in 2009, a couple years after I finished my abdominal imaging fellowship, where I was trained to and still am reading VC. We were working on an issue about private insurer reimbursement for screening VC in the state shortly after they passed a state law mandating that private insurers cover colorectal cancer screening. I don't have time to get the details here, but what I'll say from a government relations standpoint, our team was still relatively in its infancy. For instance, at the public hearing regarding the writing of the rules for that bill, we were not even recognized to make a public comment. Well, it's 9 years later. We're still fighting for VC reimbursement. And again, as you know, we'll be talking about this on Capitol Hill Day this year for the second or third time. And I sure hope we can push this issue over the finish line. For me, this issue has been the single most important issue for me to take up the charge of advocacy because it's simply the right thing to do for our patients. Well, I use this as a kind of a convenient starting point for both our chapter and for me. Back in 2009, our chapter wasn't even being recognized in that public hearing. Early in 2016, our state faced a scope of practice issue in which a bill was introduced that would grant physical therapists the right or ability to order radiographs without supervision of a physician. We were, both the WRS and our medical society, were opposed to the bill over patient safety concerns in which an incidental finding, say like a pulmonary nodule, possibly an early lung cancer detected on a shoulder x-ray, for instance, may not get appropriate follow-up or management by the PT. Prior to the General Assembly vote, I had the opportunity to testify before a Senate Health Committee, but really there was little I could do to sway the senators' opinions. It seemed that their minds had already been made up on the issue. It seemed that patient access and convenience carried the day over any safety concerns. Dr. Andrew Wu of the RAND later shared with me that we're probably too late to that issue. I've heard that oftentimes, by the time these public hearings roll around, the decision on an issue has oftentimes largely been made. Well, the PTs were well funded and well organized. We were not successful in stopping their effort, but as a chapter we grew, and here's how. I reached out to Melody Ballesteros and Dr. Wu of the RAN at the time to see if they'd assist in a call to action, or a CTA. With their help, within a day or two, we were able to put out a statewide CTA And a total of over 300 letters were subsequently sent by radiologists across the state to the state reps. The advantage of the RAND CTA, as you may recall, is that once you open that email, it only takes like 3 or 4 clicks to send that letter off to your member of Congress or state rep. Well, for our first CTA, we had a modest 13% overall response rate, but a pretty impressive 51% of those folks that actually opened the email sent that letter off. Certainly better than what would have happened if we did it the old way. And kind of as a point of perspective, if you remember the MAMO CTAs from about that same time, the response rate there was 11%, and for the SGR repeal that got one of the highest response rates, it was 26%. Working with the RAND for state-level CTA is something we had never done before, and I think it was a step forward for our chapter. I'll end with our last and most recent legislative activity, breast density notification laws. In early 2017, State Representative Mike Rohrkast actually approached us. Yes, you heard that correctly. He approached our chapter asking for our guidance and advice on an issue. He was considering introducing breast density notification bill at the request of constituents diagnosed with advanced breast cancer after dense tissue massed on a mammogram. I'm not a breast radiologist, but I know some good ones in my department and in the state. So I was able to help coordinate that initial site visit with Representative Rohrkast, and where we provided some background info and education on the issue, as well as a facility tour. We remain neutral on the legislation, but anticipating a strong likelihood this is going to pass, we continue to work closely with Representative Rohrkast throughout the process, testifying at the State Assembly hearing on both the pros as well as the cons of passing legislation. The results of our effort was a bill that required patient notification, but it minimized institutional burden and more prescriptive language. I think within the power of our organization, we did everything right this go-around. 1, we were early on the issue. 2, we built a good rapport, political capital with our representative. And 3, we were able to influence the language that ultimately was in the bill that ultimately was passed on April 5th, making Wisconsin the 35th state to pass such a law. Here I'd add another key team member to any issue, and that would be an ad hoc experts. In this case, breast radiologist Dr. Jen Bergen and Mael Azabi, you see there, were outstanding resources and extraordinarily generous with their time. This is the kind of the core of our team for this issue. Other RFS sessions have already touched on this about how to get started in political advocacy, but I'm going to add my 2 cents here. All advocacy teams will benefit from having a team member who's willing to just roll up their sleeves and do it. Help lead the effort for successful advocacy any way he or she can. John Cotter's Our Iceberg is Melting outlines an 8-step process for successful change, with step 1 being creating a sense of urgency around an issue, helping others to see the need for change and the importance of acting immediately. Back to RADPAC. Remember that 5% participation rate I mentioned? Well, when I became Secretary Treasurer in 2015, I made it a personal goal of mine to see if we could make our chapter at least average in the eyes of RADPAC. Maybe 15% state participation rate. Set the big, hairy, audacious goal of winning our division in the March Chapter Challenge. I created a sense of urgency by starting to speak on advocacy. First to my section and then my department, hoping to get some buy-in or commitment. Oh, I feared this could turn out badly for me. I had visions of the hostile crowd throwing bottles in the Blues Brothers Rawhide episode from the movie there. But as an aside, to quell those fears, I boned up on this advocacy stuff. I had the teachings of Dr. Andrew Wu and Dr. Fleischhahn, who may be in the audience still, Josh Cooper and others, in my back pocket from the prior ACR Crossroad meetings you see here. And I hadn't even attended one of these, an ACR meeting back in 2015. But those, I bought those virtual sessions, and they gave me the knowledge and the courage and kind of my protective Kevlar, so to speak. Well, those recorded sessions from those past ACR meetings and the JACR articles you see here are gold, and I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with these, to get your hands on copies of these recordings, especially if you're just starting out, and then share them with your chapter and your colleagues to debunk some of those so-called myths around advocacy. With the move away to kind of the refocusing of the meeting away from some of these educational sessions, if I could make one suggestion to the ACR, it'd be to make those old recordings as widely available and any new lectures on advocacy as possible to all membership, not just the RFS section, because if you think of this meeting as kind of the bonfire of advocacy throwing out sparks, you never know where one's going to land and catch fire. Well, back to the story. No bottles were thrown at me, and it turned out well. We got 100% buy-in within my section. We challenged other RAD groups around the state to do the same. It was a group effort, and Since then, Wisconsin has risen from a perennial Division D bottom feeder to win our division twice in 3 years. In 2016, we exceeded 20% participation rate, and again, we won this year, and we even got Ted Burns up to visit. So with regards to change management and leading change, I think RLI is a great place to start. For instance, look at the webinar series next month. Personal leadership, begins with yourself. I think also the IHI Snowflake or distributive leadership model has a lot to offer for chapters with regards to chapter organization as well as building power among various stakeholders in a state when it comes to some of these issues. Well, I'm a former Navy flight surgeon and military history buff. I'm out of time, but I just wanted to share my own Napoleonic quip to add to Dr. Wu's there. And that is, soldiers generally win battles, generals get credit for them. 10 years ago, I was truly, from a grassroots standpoint, I was a foot soldier. But by showing up for key events like testifying at public hearings, attending our state doctor's day, and also representing RADPAC at a recent Senator's fundraiser, creating a sense of urgency around issues and then getting buy-in and building power on those issues, I feel like I've moved the needle just a little bit. And I recommend, especially for the residents and fellows and early career ads out there, to just roll up your sleeves and do it like VC. It's a marathon, but keep at it and you'll learn along the way and find it a rewarding experience. Thank you, and on Wisconsin.
Thank you, Tyler. And now, last but not least, the chair of our Radiology Advocacy Network, David Humans, is here, and he will describe RAND features and illustrate how RAND's grassroots capabilities can be of assistance to you with your respective state advocacy efforts. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Lorelei, and thank you all for sticking around this afternoon. Special thanks to Eugenia for including all of us and me in this conversation today, and especially to the support staff who have kept us on track and tried to keep us on time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. There we go. I have no disclosures. On the shoulders of doctors like Dr. Fleischon and Dr. Wu, we continue to develop a vibrant and growing advocacy network that has a lot to offer as resources for you. On top of the state issues that you've heard today, you've heard also what a collaborative group that we have so that we can benefit from each other's wisdom and experience at both the federal and the state level. And what I would like to do in the next 5 minutes really is talk to you a little bit about what those resources are and continue on the optimism that the folks behind me here have provided for us today on moving forward on issues that are important to us and important to our patients. As a result of all our growth and the hard work of the folks behind me, we now have a grassroots network active in 48 of the 50 states, soon hopefully to be 50 states. And we've developed advocacy tools, some of which you've heard about today. We have call to action software that can help us provide support to you at the state level, much as we do to folks who are working at the federal level. We have a lot more in common with the state activities than we have differences. And so we offer a lot of other resources. We have resources including peer-to-peer sharing and communication, support with legislators, access to legislators, both at the federal and the state level, which is really useful. We've heard about some of the benefits today. Obviously, you develop relationships, not just with your legislators, but look around the room, look next to you. We're developing relationships with one another, learning from one another, and ways to move the ball forward. It's a slow game, but it's a game with hard work that you really make some progress, and we've heard some great things about that today. Another benefit, of course, is when you have a legislative victory, either at the federal or the state level, you really feel the full force of that because you know the good that you're creating beyond the seat that you're sitting in, but to all the folks who are going to follow in your wake. And that's something that you can be proud of. It'll also strengthen your state chapter, not just with respect to your legislators, but also in building credibility with the radiologists in your state who you're really counting on to support your efforts, because after all, just like at the federal level and at the ACR, they benefit from your efforts. And anything that we can do to recruit them, get them to work hard in our favor and support us is worthwhile. This is a picture actually of Dr. Wu. He is not the one sitting on the side. He's actually sitting in the legislator's seat there. His relationship building is sort of legendary, and although he's retired, both from radiology and from the Radiology Advocacy Network, when he comes to Washington, D.C., he still goes out to lunch with Representative Holden, and they talk about things that have to do with legislative efforts, but a lot more that have to do with one another. So these relationships can be lasting, and these are the kinds of things on which trust and credibility and ultimately success are built. Why does it matter? I hate to start any slide by saying this is a busy slide, but this is a busy slide. I'll just start by saying that those lines represent the relative success that your efforts can have in moving the needle for a legislator that hasn't quite reached a final decision on a particular issue. So the top one talks about an in-person visit with your legislator. You can see that between the dark blue line, which represents strong favorable response, to the light blue line, which is favorable response, that's almost 100% positive response from the visit that you've taken the time and the effort to make. Just below that, contact from somebody who represents other constituents. Guess what? That's still you. You're here, you're visiting the Capitol, you're gonna roam the halls and talk to people for the benefit of the people who are at home. So again, just by showing up, you're making potentially a big difference on issues on which they have not yet reached conclusive decisions. Other things, letters, emails, all these things count. So even the small efforts, calls to action, they can have a huge benefit. I'm just going to run through a few things that we've had legislative victories in at the federal level. You'll recognize some of these. They have to do with reimbursement. They have to do with access to care. They have to do with scope of practice for nurses in VA hospitals who will not be able to read x-rays and MRIs as a result of our efforts. And even in this contentious legislative environment, in March 2018, as the omnibus bill was signed, it included increased mammography coverage. So there's room for progress at all levels. And at the end of the day, advocacy gets you results. At the state level, we see the same thing, hard work. Folks in North Carolina, Vermont, you get certificate of need. You make progress in those areas. Reimbursement cuts, scope of practice is often a contentious issue. In New Jersey, I'm proud to say we achieved mandatory insurance coverage for digital breast tomography recently, and that comes with some of the hard work that you heard about today, not the least of which is radiologists being willing to go down and testify, like Dr. Nicole Sapphire, colleagues of mine, some of who are in the audience from the New Jersey Radiological Society. Similar efforts paid off just in the last few weeks in Missouri with Dr. Amy Patel and her colleagues getting approval for digital tomography. So success is there waiting for us. It's just hard work. What can you do? You've heard it. I'll say some of it again. Stay active. Stay aware. What's going on at the federal level? Maybe more importantly, what's going on at the state level? Serve as an advocacy representative for your chapter or for your practice and foster some relationships with your legislators. That's how we get these programs to grow. Be active in your state chapter. Do you know who your chapter executive committee is? Do you know anybody at your state level? Make a point of getting to know them. Volunteer. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it can reap big benefits. Learn the issues that are affecting your state. Sometimes, as we've heard today, that can be very difficult. It means keeping your ear to the ground. It means staying active. But without it, as we've heard also, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu, and we've all felt that at some level. You can visit legislators in their offices. It's very easy to do. They're delighted to see you, particularly locally rather than in Washington. They have town hall meetings. They love people to come in and have an intelligent conversation. They're just real people like you and me, and they don't know everything they need to know to make good decisions. So we help them. We invite them to our offices. We invite them to our hospitals. We show them that we are human. We humanize our job. We humanize our small businesses. We humanize our employees, and we turn us from policy issues into people issues. And that has a tremendous impact. The RAN has resources. We have money resources. We have resources to connect you with your legislators. We have resources to generate calls to action, both at the federal and the state level. So once we work through the chapter presidents and your state groups, we can actually help draft letters not only to your legislators, but also to chapter members so that we can generate calls to action and hopefully get some more positive results like some of the tremendous results that we heard from folks who have already spoken to you today. I'll remind you, you've heard it before, I hope you hear it again. We have an app, it's easy to get. iTunes, Google Play, just look up ACR Advocacy, Radiology Advocacy. It's very easy. It's a great way to navigate the Hill. It's a tremendous, short, easy access resource to get the bullet points for the things that we'll be talking about on the Hill today. As you walk into the office, it's a great last-minute reference. Congressional directory, all things that you can use when you get home as well. And for those of you who aren't yet active on Twitter, which probably goes for most people over the age of 35 in the room, I guess, I would encourage you to learn it. get facile with it. It's an easy tool to learn. It's actually a lot of fun. My kids are a little jealous of me, which gives me new credibility at home. And it's very, very effective for communicating and for making new friends and building new relationships. So I'm happy to say I've seen people in real life here that I've met over the past 12 months, and it's been a whole lot of fun doing it. One way to get started is to submit some photos on Twitter. And any of us can teach you just hashtag Hill Day. If you put it in your tweet with a photo, that's going to get you some recognition. And each year we feature photos that have been taken in the years before. So at the end of the day, please use our resources. The Engage platform is another place where you can share your experience, your wisdom, and your problems with your peers in a protected environment. Join your advocacy network, participate in your advocacy community, bring up your young folks, your residents, your fellows, your young physicians, and spread the word at home and help us continue to move the ball forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. I want to thank my fellow panelists for sharing their expertise with us, and I hope you found the presentations helpful. The panel will now take a few questions from the audience at the microphones. Please introduce yourself and specify if your question is for the entire panel or for the individual presenter. We only have a few minutes. Are there any questions?
Heidi Edmondson from Minnesota.
Microphone 3. Yes.
I'm curious how you handle some of the omnibus bills. So Minnesota in the House just last night got a almost 1,000-page bill delivered to them at 7:30 p.m. and they voted for it before the night was over. Well, early mornings this morning. So any thoughts on that?
I can speak at least at a federal level, and I think it translates a lot to state level. I mean, one of the things that we found tremendously beneficial is having somebody who keeps a consistent ear to the ground. We've heard about the value of lobbyists. I too have vacillated on their value from time to time, especially as we write the checks. But at the end of the day, we have somebody who's there and aware and alerting us to things that are coming through. More generally, Dr. Ma's discussion about cooperation at the medical society level is tremendous. They have resources and ears to the ground that are really important. But as far as late at night bills that turn the corner really fast with no really opportunity to respond, I don't have an answer to that, and I suspect many of your legislators don't either.
Okay. One more question. Unfortunately, we're really late on time today. Microphone 4.
But as former chair of the SGR committee, I'll share one other observation. Tom Tillis was shown, who's a senator. One of the functions of a state PAC is to support people when they're young in their political careers. And Tom went from a town councilman to a state legislature, and our PAC supported him locally. He became Speaker of the House 4 years later and will return instant messages from the floor of the House when we had a particularly hot topic. We have excellent access to both he and Richard Burr because of support when they were in the state legislature. And that's an aspect you should never forget. And you guys may have similar stories to tell.
Thank you, Chris. Unfortunately, we have a hard stop. This room has to be cleared by 4:15 so preparations can be made for the convocation. I want to thank Dr. Ma and the panelists for their presentation on state government. I invite you, if you have more questions, to take the conversation out in the hallway out here to my left on this level. Up the steps and to the left will be the candidates, meet the candidates location. So I'd encourage those of you in the room on your way out to also stop up there and meet the candidates.